Yes, he was special. I'm doing a straight man and a movie. Yeah, it's fine. He's looking at it. So he's can't quite get it clear. You can sit the song.
Yeah. Yeah. You want it?
You said 2.5 hours? Oh, man.
They should add, because you know how we put them.
I want it for class. I was like, how do people who show up on the phone?
That's the annoying thing about it. Same, it's actually the same. So they can make a round. Yeah, school, even on the county, but.
I wanted to do econ. It's not actually science, it was like, our finance is basically economic.
Yeah, you can. That's not like.
You say that, you do that with Karen?
I went for the round of ball.
I wrote, you mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it took sorry,
It was money, I guess. Any banking?
Yeah, try to get questions. One person. It's okay.
What a show.
Oh, he asked how many people were on Zoom.
So I asked how much.
Alright,
Smartest to do that?
okay, good evening. Oh, I can speak. Everyone can hear me. It's not many people here. Good evening, everybody. Specifically club leaders, welcome. And organization leaders. Glad to see some of you here. Today, College of Liberal Arts Student Government is hosting this event so that you guys can be updated on new information as well as just seeing my face as your president, whatnot. But essentially, we're here today for all of you club leaders who run all of our clubs and organizations. We're here to discuss how student government of the College of Liberal Arts University can better serve you, whether that would be financially, collaboratively, or institutionally. We want to hear your goals, your aspirations, and concerns to see what we can do within our power in coordination with the administration to better represent you all for your academic, social, cultural, and identity groups here on the College of Liberal Arts campus. So here with me today is sophomore Senator Rothman, who will be taking notes of all the happenings of today. Vice President Coven, Chief Financial Officer Mosick, who will be reviewing the Budget and Organization Board, which is Bob, and its processes. And then I will now turn it over to our advisors, and also the Campus Life and Student Affairs Administrators, Vice President Rex and Dean Brisson.
You're not streaming, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You want your slideshow now?
One more time?
The slideshow.
Yeah, I think so. As Zaire is pulling up a quick slideshow, thank you all for coming. Basically, our agenda is to pretty much go over some of the different budget stuff and show that all to you. And then have some conversations about next steps. We do not know what next year's budget is going to look like. It hasn't been built yet. I can speculate probably that we're going to be coming in close to where we were in the most recent part of this year. But that's just speculation at this point for as we do that. One of the things that I mentioned at the student government meeting is that the reason why we had to trim our budget is because we don't have enough revenue to cover our expenses. So just like if we are at home and we do not have enough money coming in, we have to go and control what we're spending to make sure that we can have a balanced budget. So that has been a goal, and it's something that is good and it's healthy to do even though it hurts, right? So you have to go ahead and work on these things in order to be healthy as an individual, as an organization, and that is the steps that we are doing. So Dean Brisson is just going to show some of the different things from an overall financial area, and it's probably 3 slides. So a little level of detail there, but not too much. Do you want me to hit? I think we're talking to Zoom, so you just got to stand there. Yep.
So basically we've compiled the information just to share with everyone where the budget stands. And this is specifically the student engagement office budget. So student engagement is funded to support club life. So the budget that student government receives, that $100,000, $110,000, that comes directly from the student engagement budget. So I just want to share, we've had budget reductions in previous years, and not once have we ever had to interfere with club life. So these are things that just happen in higher ed that we account for and adjust for, and we make work with whatever we're given, we make it work to the best of our abilities. This year, we've been really conservative in our spending. And so that's why we had to kind of really reel it back across the board. So we started this fall, the initial budget was $695,000. That's what student engagement was allocated. We were asked to reduce by $200,000 in the fall, which no one even knew about because we could make that work within just the department. We didn't have to touch anything with club life. This is department events. So this means we kind of redesign how the Drew Nightlife program works. We stopped offering things like off-campus trips that the office would normally host and subsidize for students. So we make adjustments. And again, we've done this in the past. So that's something that we accounted for. So in the fall, we were given $495,000 is what we started with. The allocation, this SGA club allocation is reduced from the $100,000 that goes to student government, but that's accounted for in the additional club budget. So this money that we give to student government is then decided where that $100,000 goes by student government and the Bob board. This additional club budgets, like the student government allocation, it's 10% of what goes to clubs, goes to student government. The Acorn, Commuter Student Association, WMNJ, BIPOC Mentoring. We have a whole bunch of student groups, including all grad and Theo clubs that also receive money from the student engagement budget. That totals $113,000. A group like the Acorn or Insanity's Horse, the literary magazine, they are funded basically to cover what it is they need to do. So the Acorn receives the money it needs to print, to host its website, to have its supplies like its cameras or computers and maintenance and software. So they receive an allocation directly from the office to make sure they can keep running. The same thing happens with the literary magazine. Their costs are basically all entirely in the spring semester. We fund their printing of the literary magazine. So that's how that works. So the total of all club budgets was $206,000. And then what was spent in the fall by all clubs was $63,000, leaving us with a balance of $143,000 from the total of club budgets minus all of these expenses was $143,000. So new this year was this introduction of a January budget reduction, which was the first time we've seen a mid-year reduction. Like I said, we're being super conservative on our expenses this year. So we originally had $252,000 to start this fall. So that's all of the student engagement budget. That includes the club funding, okay? That was $252,000. We were asked to reduce by $110,000, leaving us with $141,000. So as you can see, the amount that we were left with for this spring semester was not even going to cover just club budgets, which meant no programs on behalf of student engagement, no junior senior, no Drew Fest, no Spring Saturday. None of those events that we do could happen if we left club life as it was to have all of the funds. So we decided, unfortunately, we had to go through this drastic budget reduction of 50% to make this manageable so the office could still host programs and hopefully clubs could still continue just on a scaled back version. So that's why we decided to do a 50% budget reduction. We also had some kind friends from outside of student engagement, such as in counseling and health services, who were able to readjust some funds to give us a little extra, like a few extra dollars to make sure we didn't have to do a 60% cut, because that's what I was actually looking at first. But we were able to make this only a 50% reduction. So that came our new balance for club budgets of $71,000, and the department has $70,000 to execute this spring semester. So I just wanted you to see how the spring budget total equals the allocation of what we were given by the institution. Now, another thing I wanted to note, Steph did some research for us. She pulled some data from the path, and it looks like club spending from spring semester last spring was about, it was what, $69,000 is what was actually spent last spring. So that number didn't include absolutely everything, like all those extra clubs, that's path budgets. So I'm thinking that last year we spent very close to that, but a little bit more than what this $70,000 that we actually have. So that's where we are at this time. That's really all I have. I don't know if you want, is there any questions on that process? We will be around, so.
Yeah, and one of the next things that we want to do, and we have done this probably, Michelle and I have worked together for a few years, about 13 years.
15 years.
15 years, okay. And the two I didn't like her, so I just count the 13. There's really over it. But we've had to do this a couple different times. So we actually inherited a budget from someone who had overspent in their dean's role by $500,000. So we had to go ahead and cut a lot of money at that point to go on making things work. So we've had to go ahead and be creative there. But every time we've done this, we've wanted to also have a reset. So what do the current students sort of see as priorities and other different aspects for there? Is club life itself important? Are larger events important? And how do we go ahead and balance all of that? Again, the Acorn budget goes primarily to printing. It's not uncommon for us to go for newspapers to limit their number of print editions, not completely cease, but limit that to be able to go ahead and save on money. So again, can that money then, if we're not going to do as much print run, are we going to be able to go and then reallocate that money to other different parts of club life, et cetera? And what does that look like? Same with the radio station, same with the pub and other different things that are off the top. Are there ways that we can get creative that can be there? There was a big push in December in student government to start having guests come to events. We used to have a lot of guests come, but then they often did not pay. So you're bringing someone to junior senior that's off campus. Again, when I go to my spouse's holiday party, I pay full price, right? So if it's $150 that his agency is paying, I pay $150 to go. And is that something we would want to have our guests do? Because again, the students in essence are supplementing that in certain ways. So there's a lot of different philosophical points that we would like to have a small group work with. And I've already had a conversation with the vice president, president, and Bob chair about how we can go ahead and start this and have a rather holistic conversation with as much voices as possible, knowing we're what, like 3 to 4 weeks away from the work that Bob needs to do, be able to get that done with spring break thrown in the middle. So those are some of the conversations that we want to make sure we start to have as we go forward, so we can get things set. If I were to guess, we probably would shoot for around a total like 410 to 425K budget overall, if I had to guess.
Which is
So,
close to where we started.
which is a little bit less than where we started the year off, but again, those are things that we had to do. The overall cut for my area was around $280,000. The two biggest areas that were hit the hardest were student engagement and athletics.
That 280 was for spring. You're talking
Correct,
about,
for the spring,
yeah.
not the fall, because we took multiple budget stuff. The other thing that we always do in our area, which makes it really hard to cut budgets, is we do zero-based budgeting. And one of the things we need to start working on the clubs and organizations is stop over asking for stuff you don't think you're going to use because it's taking money off the table for other clubs and orgs. So if you think your event is going to do X, is adding that up and not saying, let me add $1,000 so I get everything I want. We really need to get to the point of saying, this is what it's going to cost for all of these individual items. And this is what, and have a much more truer accounting for what that will be, which is stuff that we do in our own area, which helps. And I knew that I know that sometimes people are like, if I ask for 10,000, I'm going to get 4,000. So I don't want to ask for 4,000 because then I'm only going to get 1,500. And we need to work on that overall philosophy too, because we just need to be able to start having much more realistic funding for things that are there. What is interesting, as a few people have said throughout, is that even as budgets were cut, most likely a lot of clubs and orgs are not even going to hit that spend because historically they have not. So there's been money that has been left on the table in the past. And how do we, again, go ahead and make sure that we capture that into a better way? And there's times where we've done club budgeting on the semesterly basis. And then sometimes it's been annual. So that way, again, sometimes you have a student leader that is on break because from the club, because they're overseas at London semester. And there's a lot less programs taking place then, and they're going to have a lot more in the spring, so they want to fund differently, et cetera. So those are other different strategies we can all talk about. So those are things that you should look out for in the next couple of weeks when we start to have those conversations for what the overall philosophy is. But we wanted to do a high level of where we go ahead and do our spend. Yeah.
Senator Rothman brought this up in the past, but I understand that the university is running millions of dollars in deficit. And are these small, I know any cuts must be done because you're trying to balance the budget, but will there be future cuts? Are these little incremental improvements helping the overall picture?
Yeah, so the question is, the university has not had a balanced budget in a while. Are these incremental cuts helping? And the reason why we had to do a January cut was to go ahead and make sure that we had a cash balance budget this year. This is probably the first time we've had a cash balance budget in 15 years. When you look at the overall top end of what takes place at Drew, obviously the revenue comes in. The primary revenue is student fees, whether that's tuition fees, room and board, et cetera. All those things come in. The top expenses are either financial aid back out to students or salary for faculty, staff, and student employees. There are either 1 and 2 in those categories that flip-flop back and forth, and then everything else sort of gets spread out. Other different funding sources obviously are rentals. So as we rent out the place to visitors, donations that come in, typically annually, that's around $7 million that'll come in from donations, and that factor. Those are things that they continually trying to push. Sometimes those are flat cash donations, sometimes they're bequests. And with the bequest, you never know when that's going to happen. We don't root for people to pass away and leave us money. But that sometimes goes and change some of those fluctuations and points there. So the cuts that we made this year going into it was, and we talk about the cut that we did in August, that was to get us to a balanced budget at that point. And then we looked and had to do a reset to get us to the point where we'll be cash even through. So this is huge for Drew, but what should normally be happening, right? If you're bringing in this amount of money, you don't want to spend this amount of money on a regular because you're just going to be broke. So that is the biggest factor that we're doing. So it's actually really encouraging because I know there's always sort of a subline, oh, you're cutting budgets, what does that mean? It actually means we're much healthier than we were before because we're paying attention to stuff much better, but also we're living within our means, which means that as we continue to build, we can go ahead and have that positive impact. So we did, one of the questions that came up earlier that was similar to that was, well, where did this money go? This money all just went to the bottom line to reduce expenses because we didn't have enough revenue come in to cover that. It's not like any money from this area went to pay for biology supplies. Like that's not what would have happened. But all the budgets were refigured and recalculated because of that.
I think it's also important to note that like we are tuition and fees dependent institutions. So as VP Merckx was saying, the tuition and fees that students pay, the fundraising that happens, the grants that come in, all of that helps each budget year. So we are not necessarily saying like, okay, this is what our budget is for 10 years from now, because we are so dependent upon our enrollment. Now, other institutions right now, you might be hearing in the news, places like Cornell and
Case Western.
Case Western, a lot of places with the change in presidential leadership in the Oval Office, there's a lot of grants that have stopped moving forward. So some of these institutions were actually depending in this budget year on these external dollars. So their budgets were created in the summer for this fiscal year, assuming these dollars were a guarantee, because at the time they were, and now there's been a stop on that. So some of these institutions you're hearing are stopping hiring new staff. They're not doing additional programs because their budgets have somewhat evaporated in the middle of the academic year. So we have, I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, we don't have that type of dependency on like National Institute of Health funding for research, but we're just dependent on these other dollars. So there's similar problems, different reasons why those problems are happening.
So we're shielded more than public institutions from these, the lack of grants per se.
Seemingly because we're not as
Okay.
dependent on those as some of the other institutions are. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of screaming the last week because Governor Murphy's budget was not friendly to higher ed. So his new budget proposal is really, really rough. I was on a call with the lobbyists who actually are the main lobbyist group for the publics, and they're just livid because they took a substantial hit in the overall budget, especially the publics. And again, so now they're getting a federal hit and also a state hit for that. New Jersey has rarely been generous to independent colleges when it comes to funding. You know, even programs that started to benefit private institutions like TAG were then expanded to also help public schools. But the overall spend that we get in the budget year annually for 13 private institutions is insanely minimal from the state of New Jersey. So again, that's bad in most years, but in
Yeah.
the current environment, it's something that's a positive because our budget's already built on that. But there's one school whose 80% of their annual operating budget is from NIH grants. And they're going to have significant reevaluation of where they're funding all of their programs and operations because that money might not be coming in. Case Western. Any other general questions or specific questions?
Did any other departments other than student activities take budget cuts?
Yeah, every single department had one. For full disclosure, my departmental budget 3 years ago was $9,000. It's just been cut now to $2,100. So part of the reason why is because we've always wanted to take the cuts from places that can be absorbed in certain ways than the clubs or orgs. But probably I would, if I had to guess, I would say every department on campus took a cut.
Yes.
I only know the ones in my area intimately. But I'm assuming my colleagues in cabinet all cut all other areas as well in different spots. Come through for food.
Did budget cuts. We're seeking to attend a conference that's at Princeton, we can't attend the NYU one because of budget cuts, which is fine. But it's put us like slightly below the amount we're able to, if I was like sending the itemized requests and everything to some, to like allow us to actually do literally anything for the club. Because we currently state is like, we have far too much viable budget, but we can't actually do anything with it because we're below like transportation to actually get to do.
Right.
We can talk about that specifically. Unfortunately, like right now, there's just not a huge cushion for like extra funding to go out that way.
And I'm not sure if there's any ad hoc dollars out there, as I hear.
Or other clubs looking to share.
We got told, from Ken, so we're not gonna add hoc this year.
Right,
He said to me that it's not official, but it might be able to find something.
right. I mean, the short answer is if there are needs, let us know, because we will try to move mountains to make us accomplish those needs, right? And all of that was within reason. One of the other huge issues that happened in my lifetime here was there was like a ski club. And they were in charge of funding one year, and they funded themselves $25,000 to go on a ski trip. You can imagine how that didn't occur because everybody else in every club and organization freaked out, right? So you make sure that the money is being spent with the appropriate level of stewardship. But if you're short a certain amount, then there's a variety of different things that we can try to work on to do. Yeah.
Yeah. First time
But-
in 15 years. Did you hear?
Yeah, the first time in 15 years that there's been a cash balance budget. I don't know why it took so long. It should have been happening all along, and I will tell you as someone who's been, this is my 26th year here, which just means I'm old. But in that time frame, and Steph has been here all of those 26 years, first as a student and then as an employee. But during all of that time, we've always been sort of feeling like we've been cutting budget and cutting budget and cutting budget is sort of a feel if you were to ask anybody from the faculty and staff that have been here for a while. The leadership team that is currently in place is probably just the sharpest at pulling this all together, to be blunt. And making sure that all of the expenses are accurate, but also just that we're living within our means and making tough decisions. There was a time too where again, I've been on university leadership now for 6 years, maybe 7 years. In that time frame, I've had 3 different presidents. The one president that I first worked under was some of the areas where there was a huge overspend, and some of that was a right sizing. It's all publicly available, so it's not like I'm sharing inside secrets. But a decade ago, we might have been over budget by $20 million. That's not sustainable for a lifetime, right? So that is stuff that we had to go and rein in. And there was just bad projections on revenue. There were people who thought that you could go ahead and bring in X number of students at a significantly lower discount rate. And that's just not what the market is bearing right now in higher ed. So there were just really bad sort of projections in that way. But it's been President Link's mission and also directive to make sure that we are in a balanced budget, because you're not going to be a survivable institution in 20 years if you continue to spend like we have the last decade. So that is why. Yeah.
The last time we had a balanced budget.
During COVID, there would have been 1 year just because we had COVID money coming in. So our expenses were significantly less. So there would have been one that would have been there when it came to cash, but it's sort of fake in some ways.
Okay, so real.
So a real one, yeah, you're probably looking, I would guess within the last 15 to 20 years where it was actually balanced. There's certain things that we never, it's on cash. Because if you do accounting and all, right, there's also within our budget is what's appreciation and depreciation. And the depreciation obviously is all the deferred maintenance that you see, and we have a lot of old buildings. Again, if we were NYU, our entire residential population would be in one building. We have 16, right? So all of them have different costs and different things associated with that. So our annual depreciation is around 7.8 mil, somewhere in that. So that is in the budget. And ideally, like if you're insanely healthy, you're always going to have that depreciation level lower. And you're not going to have that impact. But we take that out because that's what everybody does when it comes to a cash budget. You don't include that number because it's not a cashable issue. So that comes out of that, but it's been a significant amount of time, and this is the year where it seems like we're on target to go ahead and make sure that we are fully balanced. Yeah.
You mentioned in the past that projections of revenue go up and that the nature of the drivers. Do we have the projections of revenue are more accurate or more positive in the future?
Yeah, 100%. So again, the current CFO that we have and myself and a few other people have done a lot of different work to make sure that that is set. We actually are doing slightly better for revenue generation than we have in this fiscal year than what was projected in the budget versus actual. Where we were off slightly was just the aid. We gave that more aid than we had budgeted for, so that was off slightly. But overall, when you look at net tuition revenue coming in, and that was there. Steph and I spend hours looking at projections for what housing would look like. And it's really taking different ratios that have been built and refining them. And that has probably taken 3 or 4 years, partly because of COVID impact to the overall housing structure, to go ahead and make sure that that formula is strong. So that is stuff that has been worked out really well. The other areas that were significant for us is the graduate school and the theological school. The students that we now are pulling in are much more short-term, but more full-time, which also is a huge part of our revenue calculation. It was really hard to take someone who might be in a program that they're lingering for 15 years, how to go and generate a level of revenue based upon that. But some of the work we've done in that area has fixed that. And we're very, very conservative going into that as well. So that way we can make sure that we're setting things appropriately. Yeah.
According to my emails and everything, last year, Bob was able to let student leaders know what their budgets were by April 30th of 2024, given the circumstances of not knowing what the current budget will be for the next school year. Is there will that date, April 30th, or just April in general, before we're all out of here in May, will that be pushed really back with Bob to really decide what money to say with respect to?
Yeah, so the question is the timeline for when people would know. I would say that's probably safe to have the end of April as something that's fair, because we have to make that decision now so that Bob can go ahead and plan. And then we just have to leave a fungible amount that potentially would be cut from other different areas. And that includes not only areas in student engagement, but also other different spots, right? RHA's budget might be a little too high from what their spend is this year, so we can go ahead and pull that off to go ahead and cover something else. And that's what, again, the conversations we want to have with the student leadership to see where those priorities are. But we should be able to have everything set for what that process and final number would be before we end. The way that the budget is prepared too, from a timeline standpoint, is the trustees will approve that in June at their trustees meeting, which I think that's June 6th, if that's a Friday. And that's when that would be approved. So obviously all the work going into that and leading up to that means that these little pieces would be done already. Yeah.
It's financial.
Yeah, financial aid comes from a variety of different things. In many ways, we're quote unquote self-funded, right? So one person might be paying something and it's going out to another person in some ways to cover that. We get a lot of aid from federal government as well as from the state. Thankfully, and even the new budget coming up, the governor does not have TAG being cut. He did propose TAG being cut over the summer months. So this summer is going to be fine, but next summer would be a challenge. For us, that was about a $70K hit for students who took work that might have summer TAG for this past year when we looked at it. But then some financial aid comes in through endowed gifts. So there's some stuff that's going to come in through the endowment that would be set up. And so federal, state, not really much local, some endowment, and then self-funded. Yeah.
Specifically the grant part.
Say that one more time.
is higher for people who receive, say, the program. Well, people at the bottom, will they be affected by these cuts?
Nothing that the institution is doing is going to impact the overall aid, right? What we have to look at is, again, if there's going to be significant shifting in the federal government and those policies, and what that would, there was just a huge change in Pell, right? That was a huge change that potentially opened it up for more people to go ahead and have access to. What the reality of that is, I don't know, because it's too new. There hasn't been federal reporting on it yet. But you know, the overall goal is to make sure, and I've done this for a long time with students in my office, sometimes over the summer, trying to clear a balance to be able to come, that we will work in every special way that we can with financial aid and others that go ahead and make sure we can get people whole. Obviously, costs increase every year to a student as well, and aid often does not go up at that same level, right? So those are realities that already exist. So if tuition costs go up, your aid probably is not going to go up at that same level. That is something that is an industry norm. Okay. Well, thank you all.
Thank you for coming, guys. Real quick, just before I have to leave the class, I know you all have received an email from Terrence, all the club leaders, about the incoming budgets for next year. So just to be a quick overview of the process for all the clubs, late March, early April, this year it's gonna be the 29th, the 1st, and the 3rd. We're all gonna have dates that the clubs can come in. You're gonna get 10 to 15 minutes to present. Everybody's gonna come with a detailed list. We have all the instructions right here that are attached. You can also find it in your inbox from Terrence, but just coming with a very concise message of what you want, what you guys need for the year, what you're planned for. Like VP Merck said prior, really this year, the biggest thing, last year we had $186,000 requested and only $100 or $100,000 to give out. So the more that clubs request more and more money just because they're afraid of getting rejected and still want to have a substantial amount, all that really does is make it a harder decision for us because we eventually just have to cut everyone at that point. So if you could do your best at giving an honest representation of what you guys need for the club and trying to have, a substantial or enough money that you guys need for your advice. But the next thing is, after this document, let me pull it up. This is going to be the sign up sheet. Where can I get this? So we have a bunch of time slots. I'm going to be there. It's going to be like 15 hours of meeting for the week for me. So everybody's going to get a 10-minute slot. You're going to be able to present. And that's just the biggest thing that we need for all the information. And we all sit down as a board, talk out every scenario and try to fit the pieces of the puzzle together so that everyone's going to have a fulfilling experience on the campus. But if anybody has questions, I'm more than happy to stay and talk to anyone or any prior emails that I can help out, I can do. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, so this is the events that happened this semester, like for the clubs?
No.
Or what they want to see in this?
Well, we use the events that you guys have done and plan to do as like a part of our, calculations, see like who deserves what. Like, for example, a lot of the clubs, we had so much requests this year that clubs that didn't spend any money. So like let's say you have a club, I give you $1,000, you don't spend any of it. That means that money is just completely wasted for other clubs. Like it doesn't come back to us. We can't reallocate it to anyone. So the biggest thing is if you didn't spend anything, we mark that down. And the next year we were going to give everybody, that club was going to get their money through ad hoc. Now with the recent budget changes, it's going to be a little different, but that was what the plan was for this year. So moving forward, everybody's gonna, you know, base it off their prior events that they had planned and that they did. I know it's gonna be a little different because of the budget cuts and people had to change their plans, but we still base off what you need in the presentation and then what you've done prior. A lot of it has to do with the certain number of members. Let's say I'm giving you $1,000 and him $1,000. If he has 50 people in the club and you have 12, then that $1,000 benefits somebody a lot differently. So there's a lot of things that work together, you know, it's different for social clubs, academic clubs, there's a lot of different moving pieces. But we all get a very good conversation. We got about 7 to 9 members on the board, so we all talk it out and do it as fairly as we can.
This is curiosity, is it possible, like, in terms of collaboration, maybe we can, like, is there like a spreadsheet or like a form of like, you know, a way to like navigate other clubs that could potentially, you know, collaborate with one another on certain events?
If you ever want to get in contact with anyone, I could help you more than enough to help you with get in contact with other clubs. Definitely a lot of people have done collaboration events. It's been very helpful for them to save money. But usually that's an individual thing with the clubs that they'll reach out.
Thank you.
Of course. Anybody else? All right, thank you guys.
Oh, did you already talk about sweeping works? Yeah, you did. Keep that going. Oh yeah. Do you have anything to talk about the goals for like next year?
Just in general, yeah, just the
Yeah.
ones I generally did already, but that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing more to add.
Okay.
I'm here to wrap it up, so thank you everyone for coming. I do want to say that if you have an organization that you feel very strongly about and that you have very active participation, perhaps you could try to self-fund and reach out to alumni to also, you know, gather donations. I think that's something that clubs could implement. And personally, for an organization I'm part of, we got a teacher donation. So I think there could be a lot more outreach that happens from the clubs themselves to try to gather more funding. That's just my personal idea. And again, thank you all for coming. I hope that all the questions were answered. Yes.
So let's say you have an event, my club, we have an event in March when we come back to spring break. It's just a social and we wanted to invite people from outside schools and we said just $2 in. So then when you have the money, what next?
We can walk you through that. Actually, just talked to Terrence about that today. So yeah, we can help you deposit it into an account that then you can utilize for the future. Yeah.
And would we have to say cash only, or is there a way to maybe like create a Zelle specific for the club?
We do Venmo, for a couple things. I just need to work out, what that looks like. And I mean, there's other ways that we can also take that in directly through our events calendar, actually, as a way for people to go ahead and sort of buy a ticket. So that is funding that is there. And we, our bank that we use is Chase as well. So there's also a way to set up stuff directly into that. And we just have to make sure it's routed and allocated appropriately, so that way it just doesn't show up as something different.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a funding question, or, sorry, phrasing, about requesting money, because when the clubs purchase something, we have to send in a request and it takes like 2 weeks, but we're not allowed to send in requests over winter break. Our budgets were frozen. For Model UN, for what most conferences, over time, the cost goes up. And because our budget was frozen over the winter, we missed the lower prices. So we were just wondering why we can't spend money over the winter break, and if in the future we could.
We could work with you on that. I mean, it's just a timing, like if you know that the deadline is gonna be December 25th, maybe the request comes in, you know, the end of November. If you don't realize that the deadline has happened until the break, sometimes it's just complicated because people are on vacation and things like that, so. we also want to make sure there's no expenses coming in that are to be spent during the winter break when people aren't here, but that would be something, your situation would be different, wouldn't impact, we want you to take advantage of early bird registrations. So. Makes sense.
Does anyone else have any lingering questions? Thank you again for coming. A special thanks to VP Merks and Dean Person for answering all our questions. And thank you to President Wright for organizing this. Good day.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Sure, yes, I didn't see it.